Last night, Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Obviously, this is a very serious situation. I think it's important to understand the economics behind these types of decisions.
Step back, withdraw your troops, respect Ukraine's sovereignty, or face severe economic sanctions. This, by and large, is the world's message to Russia.
But yeah, for Bitcoin, it's starting to die down, and everybody who didn't like the volatility and said it can't work because it's so volatile, now the volatility is dying down. Maybe it actually can work.
As far as what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, obviously, it's very similar to me to this recurring pantomime where every 6 months or so, we hear about the Fed is going to raise rates, right? For 25 years, the Fed's going to raise rates. And of course, they can't raise rates because you can't taper a Ponzi scheme. But people will always get all worried about, oh, they're going to raise rates. And of course, now we're at the point now in that cycle where they're starting to say, actually, we think we might need to launch QE5. We might have to lower rates. Japan just actually did a massive QE program, as I understand it. So they're already engaged in QE. And on a net basis, the central banks have been continuing in their program of buying their own debt monetization globally at an extraordinary rate. So there's been no diminishment in the money printing in the QE at all, and that never is going to change. And so Russia, Ukraine is similar. So here, I don't want to shock anybody with my realpolitik, but this is what actually happens. So you have QE and you have money printing, and these are the primary ways that the dollar is debased. The cantillionaires become billionaires and cantillionaires, and America goes down the shithole, as we've seen now since 1971. At some point, what's going to happen in the world, and it happened when we saw the internet. The internet went from, in 1996, when I started my .com company in Los Angeles, the Hollywood Stock Exchange, the internet was still a novelty. Paul Krugman was writing about it, that it wouldn't have any impact greater than the fax machine. And people were doubtful that the internet was actually going to succeed. And people were trying to grapple with, well, how does it work? What's a packet? This is too complicated. And then it hits that inflection point, it becomes ubiquitous, and now we're in an internet world. So Bitcoin, similarly, what we're seeing here is what we're going to see in the rest of the world in a few years. That is, it's just accepted. People are not bogged down with trying to even know how it works or why it works. They just use it because it's part of the environment. It's part of the ecosystem. It becomes ubiquitous. It's as natural as using any other technology that becomes ingrained and inculcated in your day-to-day life. So that's what we're seeing right here. Bitcoin, hyper-Bitcoinization lives here. So you have people that are just finding out about it, people who are a bit into it, and people who are zealots. And all across the board, everyone we've met in the government is a Bitcoin maximalist, understands the technology profoundly, talks about the technology brilliantly, and they're very excited about it. The people on the street, again, you find those who are definitely into it. They talk about it. Then you have the curious. But the fact is that the population had 70% unbanked before Bitcoin. And now I think that's completely reversed. It's 70% is now banked thanks to Bitcoin. There are more Bitcoin wallets and users in El Salvador than there were users of the banking system in total combined with all banks in El Salvador. So there's been a complete flip in less than 6 months. And that's a remarkable transformation in less than 6 months. So as you know, it's a virtuous cycle. Once you start thinking about Bitcoin, it changes the way you think about lots of stuff, and you want more and more and more, and then the community gets stronger and stronger, and so it's a virtuous cycle, and you see that playing out right here in a country that's made Bitcoin legal tender. So it's like a Bitcoin meetup times 1,000, powered by volcanoes, where you can go surfing. It's not Bitcoin, it's centralized garbage, either relatively or absolutely. It's not secure. Ether can be shut off in a heartbeat. It's all on corporate clusters and servers, and if the government wanted to either A, classify it as a security, or B, consider it a security risk in some way, they could simply turn it off. And that everything tied to it, NFTs, all that garbage. And then it gets worse from there.
Imagine if El Salvador had chosen any of the shitcoins, anyone, think of them, any of the thousands instead of Bitcoin. And then he had been like to the IMF, we don't give a fuck. Any of that stuff, like any of how he responds to these institutions who think they know better for what's good for El Salvador than the president does. So what would they do? Like the heads of all, the leader of any of those shitcoins would be contacted by the US Department of Justice or the IMF or any of these institutions, and they would say, hey, unplug El Salvador from your coin. And they'd be like, okay, please, I'll do it for you. Just leave me alone. So, Bitcoiners, we could just, we're the warriors. We're the only warriors out there.
Game theory. So Russia is smart enough to respect game theory, whereas China, maybe not so much. That's why China got rid of their miners, because I think China's leadership is very arrogant and they think they're above game theory. Russian leadership is very pragmatic and they see game theory playing out. They realize that what happened to the truckers and the centralized payment systems, to give one example, or to Julian Assange when they cut off from MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal, or when they sanctioned Iran over the SWIFT system, they're like, we have to create our own system for redundancy. And now, after a few years, they realize that, well, actually now it's obvious that Bitcoin in this winner-take-all hard money global race for perfect money is the winner. So we're adjusting our thinking, right? They're not ideologues. They're not dictators. They're not stupid. They go with the flow, and they see that Bitcoin is emerging as the world global reserve asset, and they're making adjustments accordingly. The country has a lot of different constituents, and they're all battling for a voice in the Kremlin. And it's not like the president can just write a dictate. It's not what people perceive it to be. They have to go through a political process, and they've been moving this political process along for a while. On the adoption of different countries, and also the comment about the early adopters benefit and the later adopters are not necessarily benefiting, I think that deserves some comments, because ultimately Bitcoin demonetizes war and monetizes peace. So we're all equally benefiting if we have global Bitcoinization by a world that love and peace have been monetized. And the actual orientation toward money, scarcity, hoarding, wealth is fundamentally changed. And I think that's going to be a big bonus for our whole species, to be frank. Now, if you look at which countries are in line to adopt Bitcoin, you have Central America and Africa are the two most active parts of the world. Central America, obviously, with El Salvador, you have 5 countries in Central America. They're talking to each other all the time. There's been a dream now for 150 years of unifying these 5 countries. That's now back in play. People are talking about it again. Bitcoin could be the standard for the entire region. We've got now the billionaires in Mexico are promoting Bitcoin heavily. Mexico is in play. Argentina is in play, with Strike is now in Argentina like they were in El Salvador. So Latin America, Central America, definitely Bitcoin adoption is exploding. And over in Africa, in Nigeria, Ray over at Paxville has done an incredible job in orange pilling that entire continent, really. And that's spreading all over Africa. It's because the use case, Bitcoin in Africa is incredible. These countries couldn't commerce with each other before Bitcoin, because even though they might be two miles away, you couldn't do any commercial activity with all these different countries because they were so balkanized financially. You know, imagine if you couldn't do business with New Jersey and New York and Connecticut and Long Island, you couldn't do business together because you were completely separate financial systems and different regulations. So Bitcoin breaks that apart, and for the continent of Africa, it's incredibly entrepreneurial, and now they've got perfect money. So we're going to see an incredible move there.